one of the big sort of counterintuitive points that I draw out in the book, The Fuzzy and the Techie, is this notion that just because you have technology skills doesn't necessarily make you relevant in tomorrow's sort of tech-led, data-infused economy. And if you look at the sort of underliers of jobs, there are tasks that make up every different job that we have. And each of our jobs has some subset of tasks that are rote, that are scripted, that are highly routine. These are things that over time we can either program robots to do them if they're manual, or we can program machines to do them through machine learning. But there's always a subset that's sort of more complicated or more complex, that requires collaboration, that requires communication, or doing things that are on the frontier of what we haven't seen before, things that require improvisation. And those are the very skills, those are sort of the skills that require adaptive or flexible learning. And so I think the counterintuitive point is that just because you have rote technical ability, you may actually be more susceptible to job automation than somebody that has flexible thinking skills. So it's sort of this false dichotomy between having technical skills being relevant, having soft skills being irrelevant. In fact, it's more the opposite. So I think that when we think about automation, it's necessary that we engage with data. It's necessary that we learn the fundamentals of technology. We learn to code. We learn to speak this new language. But I think we can't forget as well the soft skills that will enable us to sort of weather the changing economy as machines continue to take more and more rote and scripted tasks away from humans. So the progress we've seen recently with things like deep learning, with the DeepMind and AlphaGo, and sort of playing the world champion in Go. These are fundamentally groundbreaking type endeavors. I think the really interesting thing is that the artificial intelligence we talk about today is still context dependent. It's still dependent on being on a board, being within the confines of a set of rules. And so if you think about simple tasks, those are rules-based tasks that may be very easy to automate. We've sort of migrated, I think, up the funnel where we're talking about immensely complicated tasks, but I wouldn't necessarily say that we've transgressed into complexity, where there's really something that's off the board, off the chessboard entirely, off the Go board entirely. And so I think that when we can move to a realm where we're not context dependent, to me that's sort of one of the definitional qualities of when it's truly perhaps artificial intelligence and not sort of AI that's largely human-led or human-guided. So one of the new technologies that is sort of in the daily media today that we focus on a lot is this prospect of self-driving cars or automated vehicles on the roads. And if you look under the hood of this new technology, we realize that some of the biggest challenges we're facing are those that have to do with mixed-use environments. So for example, when people sort of migrate toward this new form of vehicle, there's not going to be sort of a 0 to 1 change. There's going to be this mixed environment for a number of years, potentially decades, where we have self-driving cars, perhaps partially automated vehicles, included with human-led cars. And so one of the biggest challenges is more of an anthropological challenge, or figuring out how do we get machines to interface with humans in an effective way. So if you actually look at a company like Nissan, some of the most important roles that they're hiring for are PhD anthropologists who are doing sort of ethnographic studies, looking at human communication by gesture, or by raising a nod, or giving an eyebrow wave. And these are small things that we sort of take for granted as implicit ways that we communicate as humans. But if you're trying to transcribe that into code and sort of teach an engineering team how to write the computer code for that, that becomes a very difficult challenge between sort of anthropological research and engineering. And I think that this is a perfect example of how we have to bring together both the fuzzy and the techie to really sort of meet some of the biggest challenges today with self-driving cars. So I think in 2014, we were at this height of fear, where there had been a study that came out with the Oxford Martin Institute that looked at how 47% of US jobs were at high risk of machine automation. This was also the year where Martin Ford's Rise of the Robots came out, and was sort of the pendulum swung all the way to fear. And I think taking a step back, earlier this year, the McKinsey Global Institute came out with a study where they looked at 800 occupations and they drilled down into those occupations and they looked at the constituent tasks that made up of each of those jobs. And they found that around 5% of jobs had 100% of tasks that were things that could be automated potentially by machines. But the more interesting conclusion was that for roughly 60% of jobs, only 30% of the tasks within those jobs were things that machines could sort of do over time. And so as machines take over the rote or the scripted, the routine aspects of jobs, the things that we've done many times before, the things for which we have best practices or good practices, things where you may have a note on the wall that says, do it explicitly, this order of operations, these 10 steps, those are the things that we can program machines to do in a fairly easy way over time. There are obviously questions about the use of internal teams and dedicating resources to optimize certain processes versus others. These things aren't all going to happen overnight. I think there are a lot of management questions that have to do with resource allocation around some of these issues. So technical feasibility is only the first step of automation. I think then there are many more steps that we need to consider. But I think the interesting conclusion from the McKinsey Global Institute is that for these 30% of tasks that may go to machines over time, what this does is it upskills or levels up the human, where we now have to focus on the sort of non-routine aspects of our job, the complex aspects. And in this world of complexity, where you may be good at one thing and I'm good at something else, we actually start task trading more. We actually start working on one thing for one person, one thing for somebody else. And in this environment of increasing task trading, there's a guy named David Deming, who is an economist at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And Professor Deming talks about how it's actually the soft skills that reduce the friction or reduce the transaction costs when we trade tasks. So in fact, when machines are taking over the rote or routine aspects of our jobs, and humans are left with this 70% of complex or non-routine tasks, it's actually the soft skills that start becoming more and more important.